something really strange is happening. A record number of people are leaving the Netherlands every year. The long-term trend shows emigration accelerating over past decades and reaching a record in 2025. But why? The Netherlands consistently ranks amongst the absolute best places in the world to live. It has one of the highest life expectancies in Europe. Education is world-class. Crime is remarkably low. By almost any international measure, the Dutch enjoy a level of safety and quality of life that most of the world can only dream of. So why are so many people suddenly choosing to leave? Behind this picture-perfect facade lies a structural flaw. An imbalance that is built so deeply into Dutch society that for younger generations in particular, it no longer matters how hard you work and that you follow the rules. You will no longer get ahead. This is that fatal flaw in the perfect country with hindsight. So I'm gonna return to that question of why there are so many people emigrating from the Netherlands right now. But I believe that this is just one of the many symptoms of something much more fundamental that is going wrong in Dutch society today. Other symptoms include a declining trust in government, people feeling less optimistic about the future, and for the Netherlands in particular, a proposed tax reform that received an exceptionally strong public backlash. In this video, I want to look at the underlying framework that defines the relationship that citizens have with its government. And this is a concept that is known as the social contract. And to understand why it is currently fracturing, I want to start by looking at what it actually is and how it was built. After World War II, the Netherlands had to rebuild more than its cities, infrastructure, and economy. The world was changing fast. The Dutch elected Prime Minister Willem Drees, who believed that the country had to rebuild trust between the state and its people. Around the world, governments were offering different visions for the future. In the United States, the state promised freedom and opportunity to citizens willing to work hard and take risks. In Eastern Europe, the state promised jobs and housing in return for loyalty to the collective. But the Dutch followed a different path. Drees believed that the country needed a new understanding between government and citizens. He believed the government's first responsibility was to provide security. People who lost their jobs, who fell ill, or reached old age should not be left behind. He introduced a basic income for all elderly citizens. But the government also had to create a stable economy rooted in fiscal discipline, and in return, citizens were expected to work, pay taxes, take responsibility, and to follow the rules. This wasn't simply a welfare state. It was an agreement where everyone had to contribute and everyone could benefit. A key turning point came in 1959. The Netherlands discovered one of the world's largest natural gas fields. They suddenly had far greater financial resources, allowing successive governments to expand what Willem Drees had started. The reclamation of land accelerated, and entirely new cities were built. Existing cities were expanded with suburbs. The national housing stock, as a result, almost doubled between the late 1950s and the early 1990s. Prime Minister Joop den Uyl was elected in 1973. The country was now vastly more prosperous as revenues from natural gas started flowing, and the country had just gone through 2 decades of strong post-war growth. Den Uyl argued that this rising income should be shared more broadly. The state invested heavily in public services and social protection, and it placed housing at the center of the social contract. Housing was no longer an abstract need, but it was increasingly seen as a cornerstone of stability and security. Whereas in 1950, most people lived in homes that they rented from private landlords, the market gradually changed. By 2000, most people owned the homes in which they lived, and those who were renting lived overwhelmingly in social housing. The Dutch promise is that citizens can save for the future and build wealth, and homeownership became the main driver for building that wealth. The promise was simple: if you did what was expected from you, the system would help you build a better life. That promise became the foundation of modern Dutch society, but it wouldn't hold forever. So that is what the Dutch social contract looks like today, but lately it has not been delivering the same kind of results as it did in the past. And before we get to why that is and what we can do about it, I quickly want to pause for a sponsored message. And there we go again. I cannot be the only one who is receiving such phone calls, and besides being incredibly annoying, they're a symptom of something much scarier. So this is probably a spam call, but how do you think that these people got my phone number? The reality is that each time that you sign up for anything online, your personal information ends up on a list, and what happens to it then is out of your control. In the Netherlands, a scandal broke about a Dutch tennis organization. They had sold the personal data of hundreds of thousands of recreational tennis players, and while that is unusual, if you receive robocalls or unexplained junk mail, it means that your data has been purchased from some kind of list. Incogni, the sponsor of today's video, can help you with this. They reach out to data brokers on your behalf and request for your personal data to be removed. I signed up a long time ago, and on my dashboard I can see how they have been quietly working in the background, removing my data from over 250 lists, and they're working on more as we speak. If you want to restore your privacy, Incogni is offering a 60% discount of an annual plan if you use my link in the pinned comment or in the description, or scan the QR code here on screen. That is 60% off an annual plan. And now, let's go back to the Netherlands. The social contract is not broken and it has not disappeared. The government's commitment to security, public services, and social protection remain largely intact, and most citizens still work, pay taxes, and they follow the rules. The change that is happening is primarily in the relationship between these two cards: housing and building wealth. In the mid-1990s, Prime Minister Wim Kok was elected. He governed the country during one of the strongest economic periods in modern Dutch history. On this wave of good fortune, he encouraged people to buy homes by making it easier to get a mortgage, while at the same time interest rates fell to some of the lowest levels the country had seen in decades. But this also planted the seed for a new problem. In the years leading up to the global financial crisis, real home prices increased much faster than real wages. These policies increasingly rewarded people who already owned property. This was corrected in the years following the financial crisis, but it once again accelerated in recent years. Mark Rutte was elected in 2010, and he did things differently. Interest rates remained extremely low, and the population was growing fast, mostly through immigration. Housing construction stayed behind. As a result of all of this, there were many years of limited added supply while demand kept increasing. During Rutte's tenure, real home prices rose by nearly 50%, while real wages decreased. The original bargain of the social contract had quietly begun to break. The problem was now becoming much more obvious. Young people still worked and paid taxes. They did everything that earlier generations had been told to do, and they expected that their participation in society would eventually allow them to build wealth. But the key driver of building that wealth, which is home ownership, had become increasingly out of reach. The only other path to rising living standards was to save money for the future. It is very deeply rooted in Dutch culture to be very careful with how much money you spend. And these values are often associated with how the Dutch have lived for many centuries in this very unpredictable environment. And I've already covered this in more depth in other videos that I've made in the past. But financial discipline is considered a virtue in Dutch culture. It is expected from citizens that if they have the means, that they save part of their income. And in recent years, that increasingly meant investing in the stock market. That's until that proposed tax reform. Imagine you have 100,000 euros invested in the stock market, and your portfolio gains 20,000 euros on paper. The government proposed taxing those unrealized gains at 36%, meaning that you now owe 7,200 euros in tax. You may not have that at your disposal, so you may have to sell some of your investments to cover this tax bill. This proposed tax reform sparked a massive public backlash. One of the trends that we're seeing in the Netherlands is that a greater percentage of the new wealth that is being generated is coming from rising asset prices. The government argued that if that type of wealth generation is becoming more common, it should also increasingly contribute to funding the welfare state. The government eventually realized that this was bad economic policy and they abandoned the proposal. But it is emblematic of a much deeper structural issue in Dutch society today. Here's what's going on. The government side of the bargain includes housing. And when access to housing breaks down, so does the primary way that Dutch families have historically been able to build wealth. Then came the proposed tax reform. To many Dutch people, it felt like the government wasn't just taxing investments, it was threatening the only other remaining path to save for the future. Doing the right thing is no longer enough to get ahead. That is why the backlash was so intense. It wasn't simply about a tax proposal. It reflected a deeper feeling that the Dutch social contract was starting to break down. People are looking abroad. That record number of immigrants is primarily driven by foreign-born residents who are returning home. But among Dutch-born immigrants, the pattern is revealing. A recent poll asked young people whether they are considering moving abroad because of the Dutch housing market, and 30% answered yes, while 3% was actively searching. My personal conviction has always been that I don't want anything from the government, and from researching this video I found out that that is something very typically Dutch. Most people associate the Netherlands with its generous welfare. But the social contract is widely interpreted to equally emphasize a person's contributions as its right to receive welfare, if that is appropriate. That is something that I always intuitively felt. I feel like I don't need anything from the government, and even when I have the right to something, I was inclined to say no. But that's where I had a little bit of an epiphany. So, the government is a body that represents us. And by thinking of that relationship as a social contract that you enter, it reminded me that you have the right to demand certain results from the government. But the Dutch social contract has never been fixed. It has always evolved alongside the country itself. When natural gas transformed the economy, that agreement expanded to reflect a more prosperous society. When economic growth slowed, it was adapted to meet new realities. Now, the challenge is to restore the balance of that bargain. If the state expects citizens to hand over a massive share of their income, it must deliver on its end of the contract by keeping home ownership within reach and allowing people to actually keep and grow the wealth they work so hard to build. The fatal flaw is that the government is rewarding people for sitting on property that they already own. Instead, it should treat housing as a basic need for everyone, while making it easier for regular workers to grow their savings by investing in real growing businesses, by investing in the stock market, by investing in the economy. That is the future, and that will add to broader prosperity. When a country rewards owning a piece of land more than it rewards hard work, society will eventually get stuck. And that is what's happening in the Netherlands and in many other Western countries. If the state cannot reward people for working hard, the system is fundamentally flawed. So this topic is just fascinating to me, and I could go on for hours. As a Dutch person who has emigrated over 10 years ago, I often speak with people about the Dutch government with a lot of pride. I think I could make an entirely different video about how well and efficient the Dutch government is in other ways, and I want to end on a different note. So I recently started a second YouTube channel. You can find this if you go to YouTube and search for the name C2 Center, and it should appear in the top. This channel is for people who like history. I already published a couple of videos, one about Russia, another about a failed coup in Spain, and another one about Saddam Hussein. Probably when you're watching this, there's gonna be more. Just search C2 Center on YouTube and it should pop up. So thanks again for watching all the way until the end, and if you want to stay with hindsight, here are 2 more videos that you can consider for your next watch.